What's up, YouTube? Fat Tony Gaming coming back at you again with yet another deck profile, this time of Premium Megacolony. This is a deck that I feel is actually very powerful and very well situated for the current premium meta, because it just has very little bad matchups. However, that being said, this deck is definitely one that requires a very good pilot to win and win successfully, or win consecutively. The deck is inherently strong. It can generate a lot of advantage. It can generate a lot of pressure, but the deck has plays that you as a pilot need to know when to make those plays to, lock your opponent out from being able to call cards, or when to keep your opponent off of a column, when to allow your opponent to commit to board, and it's up to you to control the pace of the game. Now, that being said, let's get into the deck profile. You see my starter here is Machining Worker Ant, the Viera version. This deck wants to build up its win condition very fast, or at least one of its win conditions very fast. It has two primary win conditions, one of them being multi-attack spam, and the other one being OTK with Xerath, Dragon of Death Guard, and Zoa. So Worker Ant is good because you want to find your cards as soon as possible to either combo kill with Zoa or find your cards that allow you to multi-attack. So he's good for that. And then also, you want Soul in this deck. Now, Soul isn't really that big of an issue for the deck, but it is an issue for the deck nonetheless in certain scenarios. So being able to have that extra card in Soul is very good. And plus the old starter that I saw a lot of people, or that I was personally running back in G era, was basically just counterblast one to draw a card. So this is just literally a better version of that card. So now, moving on, we start off with the grade 3s. I'm running 4 copies of Evil Governor Darkface Gridora. This is the card that gives you such a strong advantage in this meta. Being able to cut your opponent off of a column is good. It allows you to reduce the amount of pressure that you have to deal with. It's not super great against Excel matchups, but against everything else, any sort of superior calling clan or anything like that, like Shadow Paladins, Ange is very good because it reduces the amount of field that they have to work with. And on top of that, her GB1 skill at the start of the ride phase, which for those of you who don't know, it's Soul Blast 1. You may pay the cost at the beginning of the ride phase. If you do, countercharge 1, and then your opponent chooses a face-up card from their damage zone and turns it face down. So, being able to get back your resources and not have to worry about overcommitting with counterblast and stuff like that is really good. And it's also one of the reasons the deck can do so well, because not only are you getting back your resources, you're taking away resources from your opponent. And resource management is a very big thing in Premium, regardless of what people think. So being able to toy with your opponent's resources is really strong. So next up in our grade 3 lineup, I run 3 copies of V-Era Machining Stag Beetle. If those of you don't know what he does, is auto Vanguard rearguard when he's placed. When placed from hand, call up to 2 cards from your soul at rest, and then if he was placed on Vanguard Circle, he gains the original power of the units that were called. So this is good to help build board, and it's also really good to help you trigger your on-place abilities multiple times. There's a couple of cards in the deck that have on-place abilities that you can use. That if you ride it and then you want to be able to use it later, you can just call this out. You either ride this or call it to rearguard, and then you have you call those out and get their abilities off really quick. And so that's helpful for digging for your combo pieces and stuff like that. Last but not least, in our grade 3 lineups, we run 3 copies of Death Warden Antlion, the V-Era version. This is your kill card with the Xerath Dragon. So those of you who don't know what he does, auto skill Vanguard Rearguard. When it attacks, you may Soul Blast a grade 3 and discard 2 cards from your hand. And if you do until end of that battle, he gets power plus 10,000, crit plus 1, and your opponent cannot call Sentinels from hand to Guardian Circle. That is huge, because one of the biggest weaknesses of Zoa was the ability to just freely PG the rearguard that it called out, very easily preventing them from stopping the attack. Now this forces your opponent to have the shield to guard that attack. Now again, knowing one of the biggest things with this deck is knowing when to go off with Zoa. Sometimes you just can't do it. That being said, though, he is a very good pressure unit on rearguard because this deck can easily buff him up to humongous numbers to the point where they still need a lot to guard, and being able to deal an extra damage is huge. So, that being said, let's move on to the grade 2s. So we are running 4 copies of Machining Mantis, the V-Era version. Auto skill, Vanguard Rearguard Circle. When placed, counterblast 1. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck for up to 1 grade. Reveal up to 1 grade 3 card from among them. Put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck, and he gains 6,000 power until the end of the turn. So he basically you use him to dig for your grade 3s, so you can have the Antlion live and then have the extra grade 3s to either stride or ultimate stride. So this is one of your combo pieces, and because he's does not specify from hand, his on-place ability works like if he's called out with, like I mentioned before, Machining Stag Beetle. So if you ride him, use his skill, take another damage, and then ride Stag Beetle and call him out to the side, you get to use that skill again to look for another grade 3. So that's really good. Plus, being a 15k beat stick, regardless of whether or not you actually find the grade 3, is also very good. And it combos well with our next card. We run 4 copies of Machining Princess. Machining Princess is from the Awakening Zoo Extra Booster from the G series. For those of you who don't know what she does, she has 2 different abilities, both of which are axe skills. The first one is just rest this unit, and then you choose one of your units with machining in its card name, and it gets 3,000 power until the end of that turn. And then the second skill is a once per turn, Generation Break 2, Counterblast 1, stand this unit, and it gets the following ability. Auto Rearguard Circle once per turn. At the end of the battle that this unit attacked a Vanguard, if the number of your opponent's stand units is 0, choose one of your other rearguards with machining in its card name and stand it. So this aside from Antlion is your other win con. So because we run, I think it's something like 15 machining units in this deck, and it doesn't care about your Vanguard being machining, it just cares about your rearguards being machining. This is very good. So being able to multi-attack with it, like I said before with Antlion, this deck can generate huge power numbers, so being able to have multi-attackers in a deck that primarily doesn't multi-attack is really strong. However, that being said, your opponent can very easily play around it because you do need 0 cards. They do need 0 cards at stand, so all of their units have to be rested. But this deck does kind of have some counterplay to that, so that's not that big of an issue. So, yeah, this is probably one of the best cards in the deck because people just don't know about this card sometimes. And then last, with our grade 2 lineup, I play 3 copies of Vulgar Blister. Vulgar Blister, I love this card. I remember when the Awakening Zoo first came out, and I saw this card, and I was just like, what is this card? This card is garbage. So for those who don't know, he has 2 continuous abilities. If he is in the front row on Rearguard Circle, all of your opponent's rearguards in the same column as him can't stand during your opponent's stand phase. So he stuns a whole column, which is good, which means your opponent, if they want to do anything with that column, they'd have to overcommit by calling over those units. And then the second ability is you may pay the cost of choose one of your Vulgar Blisters from Rearguard Circle and retire it as the cost to stride a G unit with the Dark Device ability. Your main stride in this deck is Dark Device. So that is really good. And a cheeky little thing that you can do with Vulgar Blister is if you ride it as your grade 2 ride, and you say you're going second, you ride it as grade 2, and then you ride over top of it with the machining Stag Beetle. If you call it out with Stag Beetle skill, you can then immediately retire it to stride into a Dark Device stride. So that's a cheeky little thing that you can do that I'm sure some people don't know about. And what's nice with Vulgar Blister too is if you lock your opponent's column out from being able to call things with Gridora, and you have a Vulgar Blister there, if they had already had pieces there, they just lose that whole column with the Vulgar Blister in the front row, because as long as it was there during the stand phase, they can't stand those units normally through stand and draw. So now moving on to grade 1s, we have 4 copies of Machining Hornet, the V-Era version. Again, like Machining Mantis, he's here to help dig for your grade 3s, so you can either Antlion combo or just be able to stride. So for those of you who don't know what he does, he's auto ability on Vanguard or rearguard circle. When his attack or the attack that he boosted hits a Vanguard, you may look at the top 6 cards of your deck. Search for up to 1 grade 3 card, reveal it, add it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. And then if he was on rearguard circle, put him into soul. So that's nice that he kind of like lets you build back soul if the attack hits. It's kind of a trade-off, but it's really not that big of a deal with this deck. And then, you know, if you go second, just being able to ride this and then swing in, you know, like say you don't have a grade 3 in hand, which, you know, we're running 10 of them, so hopefully you do, but regardless, being able to search for your grade 3s is really good. And it also should be mentioned that every time you pull a grade 3 out of your deck, you're pulling normal units out of your deck, so you're getting better trigger compression. So that's going to help you in the later game. So next up, we have 4 copies of Spiteful Hopper. Spiteful Hopper, for those of you guys who don't know what he does, he's auto rearguard circle. When placed, Soul Blast 1, choose up to one of your other units, and they get 6,000 power until end of turn. And then if you have no face-up cards in your damage zone, countercharge 1. This card is in here primarily to help you combo with Machining Princess. So the way most of your turns go is you're gonna go stride, use Gridora's on stride skill if you're on Gridora, or use your stride skill, which is going to cost counterblast. Call out Machining Princess if you have them. Rest your princesses, use their skill. Rest your princess or princesses, use your skill to restand them, and now all of a sudden you're out of counterblast. So you just call Spiteful Hopper, Soul Blast 1 to countercharge, and then you can give something 6,000 power. So now that's some more shield that your opponent's going to have to waste to guard that attack, especially if you have a princess. Now it can restand. And this is also a good card to ride as your grade 1 ride target, because like I had mentioned before, if you ride him and then you ride into Machining Mantis, so you go ride Mantis, use Mantis's skill, and then if your follow-up is you ride Stag Beetle, you can go, if you have the counterblast open, you can go call these 2 out, and then use his on-play skill and then his skill to get the counterblast back, or vice versa. Use his on-play skill to get an open counterblast, and then use his skill to go off to help you dig even further. So that's a lot of like the synergistic plays that this deck can do. But again, like I said, these are all like plays that you as the pilot have to make conscientiously in order to help control the flow of the game. And last, with our grade 1s, we do only run 12 grade 1s. We have 4 copies of Small Captain Butterfly Officer. So Butterfly Officer, what she does is auto, when she's placed on rearguard circle, cost rest this unit, choose up to one of your other rearguards, and it gets 10,000 power until end of turn. And then at the end of the turn, move the chosen rearguard into Soul, and then countercharge 1. So again, this is to combo with Antlion to make it bigger, or you combo it with Machining Princess to make the unit that Princess is going to restand bigger, which means, you know, your opponent has to commit more shield value to guarding the attacks. And then also it can help actually set up Antlion. So like say you call something like a Machining Stag Beetle to rearguard circle to get something out of Soul that you want to pull out of Soul, then you can call a Butterfly Officer, buff up the Machining Stag Beetle, and then at the end of the turn it's going to go into Soul and countercharge. So then you have a grade 3 in Soul to use for Antlion. And now moving on to triggers. Fairly standard trigger lineup. 4 heals, 8 crit, and then 4 draw PGs. The deck can generate a lot of advantage, but from most of your units, search grade 3s is a card advantage, so those don't inherently have any shield value, so hitting the draw triggers to draw more cards, to draw into more combo pieces is really good. And plus it just frees up your grade 1 space, so you can run all the crazy tech that I'm running, like the Butterfly Officers and the Spiteful Hoppers. And of course crits for crit pressure, because, you know, if you have a crazy Machining Princess turn and you put a crit trigger on what it's going to restand, that's just going to make it that much more threatening. And then heals are heals. You want to heal damage. It's good in this game, guys. And then everything's V-era, because that extra power is very relevant and very much needed. So now, moving on to the G-Zone. I'm running 3 copies of Poison Sickle Mutant Deity Overwhelm. This is your main stride. For those of you who don't know what it does, it has 2 abilities. The first one is an Axe skill on Vanguard Circle. Once per turn, counterblast 1, choose a face-down card from your G-Zone and turn it face up. This is Dark Device, so Oh, I'm sorry, it's not Dark Device. That skill is just free. I've been playing this card wrong for a while. Anyways, so counterblast 1, choose a face down card from your G zone, turn it face up. Pay the cost. If you do, for each of your opponent's rested rearguards, draw a card. And then if the number of your opponent's rearguards at rest is 1 or less, it gains a crit and a drive. So at minimum, this is a +1 for a counterblast. At maximum, it can be, against non-Excel clients, it could be up to a +5 for one counterblast. I don't know many other card games that let you go +5 for that free, especially since counterblast is something that this deck can easily generate back. And then its second ability, which is Dark Device Continuous Generation Break 3, all of your units gain 2,000 power for each of your opponent's face-down cards in their damage zone. So that is good for buffing up fields against things like, with things like your Antlions, buff them up, your Machining Princess targets to buff them up. So that's helpful. And then plus, because Gridora does actually steal away your opponent's counterblast, that helps to feed her Dark Device ability to get even bigger. But again, this is your main stride to draw into your combo pieces and then also buff up your field. Now next, I run 2 copies of Lawless Mutant Deity Obturandus. This is the card that gives you an advantage in so many matchups. For those who don't know what this card does, it is an axe skill, Generation Break 2, Counterblast 2, choose a card from your hand, discard it, and until the end of your opponent's next turn, your opponent cannot call cards to Rearguard Circle. Cannot call them by any means at all. Can't normal call, can't superior call, through any ability whatsoever. And this is where the deck can shine against a lot of matchups. You're playing against Ichitam. You stride into this, Counterblast 2, discard a card. They can't call down their Silent Toms on their Ichikishima turn. You're playing against Geese. They can't call the Zeroths off of Geese because that's being called by a skill. You play this against things like Ange. They can't bounce and call back their cards to get multi-attacks off. So this card is what helps you control the pace of the game alongside Gridora's on-ride/on-stride skill. This card is this card is the card that proves whether you are a good pilot or not, because knowing when to use this card and when to not use this card is what's going to make or break you playing this deck. Next up, this is going to seem a little crazy, but I run 2 copies of Suppression Mutant Deity Tarantus, the GB8. For those of you who don't know what this card does, continuous GB8, all of your units, all of your opponent's Vanguards and Rearguards lose their auto abilities, and they can't intercept, and then all of your units gain 5,000 power for each of your opponent's rested units. So this thing can make your field absolutely massive. One of your win cons with this deck is just turboing out Tarantus and then calling down princesses and swinging a bunch for huge amounts of damage, or for huge numbers. So that is just crazy. Like, this deck can actually third stride Tarantus, and because of how attrition-y this deck can be, how grindy this deck can be, that is very much a real possibility to hit third stride with this deck. This is also just good against Geese, because being able to give 30k to your rearguard columns if they swing in with their Zeroths is really good. But unfortunately, if you're playing against Geese, you're playing against Geese, so you'd rather go into this to stop them from actually calling the Zeroths. And then we have, of course, 1 copy of Zeroth Dragon of Death Guard and Zoa. I've been talking about this card the whole video, how this combos with, Antlion. You ultimate stride into this, call out an Antlion, have a grade 3 in Soul, swing with the Antlion, your opponent can't perfect guard it, and now they have to drop almost 100k shield worth of guard. So that's really helpful with that. Again, like I said, one of your main win cons is this card. And again, knowing when to pop off with this card is another thing that's going to make or break you as a pilot of this deck. You can't just pop off all willy-nilly. It just won't work. And then last, these guys are basically flip fodder, but they are options that you can use in the deck. So if your opponent's trying to be cheeky and is not attacking with everything to allow your Machining Princesses to go off. You have Poison Spear, Mutant Deity, Paraspear. For those of you who don't know what he does, he's an auto ability. When he's placed on Vanguard Circle, you rest all of your opponent's units, not just rearguards, units. So even if they were cheeky and didn't swing with their Vanguard, you rest all of them. And then if you rested 3 or more units, he gains 5,000 power and you draw a card. So again, this is what can enable you to go into your princess plays if your opponent's trying to counterplay that. So that's one of the reasons I run him. Next up, we have a card who I never use, so I don't know his name. Master Swordsman, Mutant Deity, Anguish Sword. This is a Dark Device stride, so you can stride into it for free with Vulgar Blister. Its ability is Dark Device, which means your opponent needs no standing units in the column as the same column as it, which is the Vanguard column. It's almost always going to be everything at rest. Counterblast 1, choose up to the same number of your units as the number of your opponent's rested units. They each get 4,000 power until the end of the turn. And then if you chose 3 or more units, draw a card and countercharge. So his ability is basically a free mini field buff, and basically replaces its cost for stride. So this can be good with Machining Princess. Buff up the targets that you want to restand with Princess, so that can help with that. And like I said, because it is Dark Device, you can stride into it with Vulgar Blister. And then last we have the one Sabreeze, because it's Sabreeze. You don't generally go into this card you don't generally use its ability to go into the card, because if your opponent's stalling you, you're generally going to win anyways. It's just basically flip fodder for the overwhelms. Wow, I can't talk today. So, now moving on to the G Guardians, we run 2 copies of 7 Stars Mutant Deity Relish Lady. This is the card that lets you turbo out to your GB8. For those who don't know what it does, this is the flip G-Guard. So it's Generation Break Run, choose a face-down G-Guardian from your G-Zone and flip it face-up. When it's placed on Guardian Circle during the battle that your Vanguard attacked your Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, your opponent may choose 2 of their rearguards and rest them. If they don't, you get to draw a card, countercharge, and soul charge. So this, in certain scenarios, gives your opponent an option. If you say you went first, you rode Gridora, used her on-play skill to lock them out of a column. They only have 1 open column that they can attack with. If you, actually, I'm sorry, that's a bad example, because going first, you wouldn't be at Generation Break 1. But still, if you locked them out of being able to call to a column, and then they only had 1 column to work with, they swing with Vanguard first, and you guard with this, that gives them a choice now. Do they let you gain more resources and advantage, or do they give up their rearguard attack? So it forces your opponent into a bad situation where they have to make this decision where, do I give up this extra attack and lose out on my aggression, or do I let you plus off of my attack? So that is a very good reason to run this card. Plus, it helps you turbo out to GB8, like I said, so that can help you hit your win con with Machining Princess and Tyrantis. Or also, just because it's a flip G-Guard, it lets you get to more cards face up in G-Zone, so you can Zoa faster. Being able to turbo out Zoa as second stride is really good if your opponent doesn't draw a lot of cards. And then next up, I run 2 copies of Featherwell Mutant Deity Morphosian. This card is just insane. It's just almost always a free 25k shield. For those of you who don't know what it does, it's when it's placed on Guardian Circle, if the number of your opponent's standing rearguards is 2 or less, he gets 10,000 shield. So, generally, by the time your opponent has attacked with one of their rearguard columns, this thing is live, unless they have a booster behind their Vanguard that they haven't used to boost. It's just free 25k shield. You can't go wrong with this card. And especially when you have things like, when you're doing things like locking them out of calling to a column with Gridora, or just locking them out of calling in general with Opterondus, this card's always going to be live. And that's also something I should mention, going back to Relish Lady. You can actually put your opponents into scenarios where all they can do is attack with your Vanguard, and this card is immediately live. This card will immediately allow you to get the draw and counter charge. So being able to play into that is also really good. And then the last G-Guard I run is 1 copy of Mutant Deity of Fortification Gristfort. for those who don't know what he does, it's Counterblast 1. When he's placed on Guardian Circle during the battle that your opponent's Vanguard attacked, or that your Vanguard was attacked by your opponent's Vanguard, you can pay the cost. If you do, rest all of your opponent's units in the back row, and then he gains 5k shield for every 2 rested units. This is good if your opponent's trying to be cheeky to lock you out of your Dark Device abilities by going into by swinging with their Vanguard and not boosting with the booster. So you can just drop this and then Counterblast 1, and they also lose out if they have any boosters that they wanted to use that have abilities when they boost. They lose out on all of those. So that's really good with that. You don't go into this all too much, because Counterblast 1 for an extra 5k shield, because you're trading with the V era heal triggers, isn't super great. But being able to cut your opponent off of doing things that they normally want to do is really good. So that is it for my Megacolony deck profile. If you guys have any questions, comments, suggestions, I'm all ears. Please let me know in the comment section down below, and then I will respond to you as soon as I can. And until then, guys, I will catch you later.